Hello, welcome to the channel and thanks for watching. And after a few weeks of building some massive Nurgle models, it's time to paint some of the smallest, the Nurglings. Now what I'm going to show in this video is painting the Nurgling set. Interestingly, as you see on the sprues here, when you buy the Nurgling set, you don't just get the three kind of stanza Nurglings, you get loads of spare Nurglings to stick on other bases and use in other projects. Never knew that, just thought it was interesting to talk about. Now all the sort of separate Nurglings, if you watched the channel recently, you'll know I've scattered loads of them across my Great Unclean Titan build. We're going to look at that later and use them on some other bases and things in the army. And we'll do an army overview at the end of this video, showing these Nurglings added into my 3,000 point demon army. So starting straight in, this is a contrast paint scheme for the most part, starting with the skeleton horde onto the horns and into the teeth and things. Now if you've kept an eagle eye, you'll notice that I started off using quite a big brush to get the paint down quickly onto the horns and things, and decided no, these models are too small for that. So actually I go through this build with quite a small brush, considering this is a contrast paint scheme, because again the models are quite tightly packed together on the base. So I think it's important, not to make too many mistakes as you go. Now the models have been sprayed black and sprayed bone white. You see there I've started off with skeleton horde and then moving into Majos purple into the kind of gribbly damaged skin bits to make it look like the guts and things. Moving on to a volupus pink for the tongue. And for those of you that have watched my Chaos Demon army painting so far, so the Nurgle army I've done and the Great Unclean Titan, you'll know this is seeming very, very familiar to those paint schemes. And there's a good reason for that, because it is essentially the same as those paint schemes. I think when you put an army together, it's important to keep real consistency through it as you are going. Now, the change of how I've painted it comes around this deep yellow that I'm putting here. So here I'm putting the Vallejo deep yellow into the eyeballs and also onto the pustules and stuff across the belly. Now, if you've watched the videos, you might know, well, hang on, you've done that before. I have, yes, but when I started doing the Demon Army, I did it the other way around. I did all the skin tones first, and then went back and did the yellow pustules before doing the wash and things you'll see later. But I found over time that I actually prefer doing it this way around, where you work on kind of the bone, the bits of sort of gribbly broken skin, the pustules, and then you move on to the skin later when it's all thoroughly dried. So adapting your paint scheme to an army, you can do that, but I've stuck to the same core colours. Now, while those initial paints are drying, I've worked on the base. So I'm just using Beastie Brown, just slightly watered down across the base here, and then onto black to get the rims kind of looking up and nice, because obviously with that white undertone that we've put on, you need to re-edge the bases. Now, the bases, if you're interested in how I've done it, just some skulls and some texture paste and everything, there is a video on the channel. Now, when we're doing the Nurgling skin, we're working with those 5 colours you can see here. Now, these are the same sort of 5 paints that I've used, again, on the greater demon army, or the wider demon army, with a slight difference, because when I've done the Nurglings onto the Great Unclean Titan that you'll see, I didn't actually use the Plague Bearer flesh colour on the Nurglings, because that was the skin colour of the whole Titan, and I didn't want the Nurglings to look exactly the same. But with it being on the Nurgle bases, I figured actually I'm going to use that Plague Bearer flesh, and that will give me sort of 5 skin tones that are all kind of working off the same palette. So, the Nazdrag yellow is probably the widest away from that kind of green, which I'm putting onto here. But again, they're all kind of along that same kind of tone of colours. They all work relatively well together, and I think they sort of blend through. So what I've done is I've consciously chosen to start off with an Nazdrag yellow, picked up 2 to 3 Nurglings off each base, painted it in the yellow colour. Then I've moved on to the Plague Bearer flesh, which is the colour scheme of the normal Great Unclean one, and again done 2 to 3 models. Now, I intended to work through all 5 colours on all 5 bases, kind of going into the run here. But what I ended up actually doing was, in the first painting session, got slightly interrupted, I did the first 2 skin colours, and then on the next painting session did 1 skin colour, and the next one finished off the other 2. And actually, in hindsight, that was a good learning, because I think because they're really close together, they're touching each other, their arms are around each other, etc. That bit of drying time in between to let the colours dry off definitely helped, because if you touch contrast paint to contrast paint, it blends together and merges, which is a very, very cool effect when you're doing it on a big model. But individual models here, you wouldn't want those colours blending together. So I did do these models kind of in a couple of batches, 2 colours, then into 1 colour, then into 2 colours. And when I was painting the models, I kind of tried to deliberately paint the ones that weren't interweaving with each other very much, if those are the ones that were in the kind of same batch. I hope that makes sense and what I'm going for. But you can see here how characterful these models really are. And Nurglings are a real fantastic part of the kind of Nurgle background. And there are some really, really comical models that you can get in the sets that add some real sort of flavour and character to it. So that's kind of why I wanted to do some Nurgling bases to add into the army. Now, the army, if you've watched the channel before already, you'll have seen it build up over the last few months. It is in total a 3,100 point army, which is a little strange in a way, but the reason for that is the Titan that is in it is 1,100 points. So the theory is if I take that 1,100 points off, it's a 2,000 point army. If I want to play a 3,000 point game, I drop the Nurglings, which I'm doing here, and the Beast of Nurgle, and that takes it to exactly 3,000. So in effect, I've built a force up that I can play either a 3,000 or a 2,000 point game, or actually what is intended in the grander scheme of things when I add it on to a Knight army, my usual Death Guard army, it will be a bigger part or part of a much bigger army. But I specifically went for 3 Nurgling bases because it gives me the points alongside the Beast of Nurgle to take the army to 3,100, which is what I needed. So there you go. Now, just watching a couple of pieces here rather than talking across, if you've been watching what I've been painting in the background, you'll see there's some real tight little gaps and stuff in here. So you can see me taking my time, kind of being a little bit careful. And if you watched with an eagle eye earlier, you'll see where I actually took the brush away, wet it in some water and took the paint off a section where it's gone in the wrong place and dried incorrectly. So another good reason to paint these in stages, because if you put contrast paint onto an already dried area, you'll be able to get it off with a wet brush. If you put contrast paint onto wet contrast paint, getting that off is going to be a real trouble. Now into the sepia wash stage. So I've done all the base coats on all the models, and this is the Games Workshop sepia wash just across every single part of this model to really blend it and tone it down. And when that's dry, it's essentially done, apart from your friend, if you're painting Nurgles rot, just to drop it onto the bases, and then that ties that in to the whole scheme that I've done for the army kind of so far. And if you notice there on the belly, where his entrails are coming out of his stomach, we didn't quite get the Magos purple across all of the entrails. There's a little bit of white still showing. So drop a bit of Nurgles rot over that and it covers your mistake. Now here is the completed 3,100 point army. I just thought I'd show you. Latest bit of figures in there, the Nurglings, as it gets into a bit of focus. So the Nurglings fit into the army quite nicely, I think. The army consists of 3 units of 10 plague bearers. The demon prince you can see there stood in between 2 of the great unclean ones. The Beast of Nurgle, just again a solitary Beast of Nurgle to take up the points. A couple of soul grinders, 1 standard one, and 1 very kit-bashed one here using spare parts from a great unclean one and the sword, etc. 4 great unclean ones, including Rotigus, the Forge World version there, and the Demon Prince stood in between them. It's a nice cover save to the Plague Bearers in game or to the larger things. And the Great Unclean Titan, which, talking about Nurglings, you see here, lots of Nurglings all over his body. And you can see why I didn't do it as the same body and skin colour. So that is the Demon Army. If you want to obviously see the channel, everything about it is on there. And I hope you enjoyed the video. Cheers, everyone.